This is going to be video number 1 on essentially how do I keep the engine running cool. I'm going to break it into, I think, 4 different pieces. And today's piece is going to be primarily about gasoline. What is gasoline? Don't want to talk about gasohol. I typically run gasohol, but just basically gasoline. Then, how does gasoline burn? What does octane have to do with the burning? And then what do we do with air-fuel ratios? And this is all just a bunch of talking and discussions, and of course there's going to be web pages in a trip to the Samba like I almost always do. Well, down there in that tank of gas of mine, the primary constituent of gasoline ends up being this molecule called octane. It's definitely octane and not isooctane, so let's take a look at octane here. Hydrocarbon, chemical formula C8H18, this is important right there. Condensed structural formula, blah, blah, a bunch of chemistry stuff there. Octane has many structural isomers that differ by the amount and location of the branching of the carbon chain. One of these isomers, blah, blah, commonly called isooctane. So a single isomer of octane is called isooctane. And I read any number of places, not necessarily YouTube type stuff or Volkswagen people, because sometimes I go off and I read things from, like, let's say, Engine Builder magazine, and I caught one of them just isooctaning this and isooctaning that. And it's like, no. It's octane. There's only one of these isomers that is known as isooctane. Its true name would be this guy right here. This is kind of like a nickname, isooctane. So let's take a look at isooctane itself. So here's the isooctane. Kind of gives you a little bit of stuff about it. But what's important about this isooctane is down here in the history. This guy used this particular isomer of octane to define the octane rating scale. And he took this particular molecule, this particular formation of the chain, and he referred to this particular thing as 100 octane. Apparently it's the best, the most resistant to knock out of all of the different structural variations. So this is what we drive with, primarily octane. If you watch my videos, you know I stick a lot of alcohol in my car, so yeah, I've got some ethyl in there too. Anyway, let's move on. Back to octane again. Okay, so in order to burn the octane, you have to take a molecule. Here's some shapely molecules here. You have to rip those molecules apart. This is a fairly stable molecule. In order to cram the oxygen in there, you have to rip these bonds apart, and making it possible for the oxygen to combine. So once you've put the heat into the motor and pulled this molecule apart, oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon are what you have. Now they're going to recombine, and the recombining process releases energy. The fact that this thing was one particular shape of octane or a different particular shape of octane when it started is transparent to the actual burning process. So the burning process doesn't care whether it was high octane or low octane to begin with. The burning process for both releases the energy of 8 carbons and 8 hydrogens bonding with a bunch of oxygens. It's the same whether it's low octane or high octane. High octane gas will not net you any additional power. So you always run in your car the lowest octane fuel that your car will run properly on. And for me, I happen to run pretty decently on that crappy ass ethanol 87. That kind of takes care of that one. There is one particular little side effect of the burning of the high versus the low octane stuff that does impact how your motor runs. Because the high octane stuff requires additional heat in order for the molecule to rip apart, the high octane fuel takes longer to get to that higher energy state in order to pull apart, which means the flame front on the high octane is slower than the flame front on the low octane. So a high octane burns slower. If you're burning your the stuff slower, you have to alter your timing to adjust for what it is that you're running. So as you jump up and down in various octanes, you've also got to alter your timing a little bit. And a lot of people don't understand that, so let me show you a little quote from a guy over here on the Samba. Here we go. Got a guy who's out in California. I always run 91 octane gas. I only have 8.5 to 1 compression in my 21. That's pretty high, but it makes it run cooler, especially here in the desert where it can get to 120 in the summer. So he's making the claim that the high octane stuff makes it run cooler, but if he's actually done a back-to-back comparison between like an 87 and a 91, but he didn't alter his timing, it's not an apple to an orange, but he doesn't realize that he's not done a fair comparison. He released the same amount of heat. If you burn him properly with the proper timing, his motor should be right there. They should be the same. Here's another anecdote that takes it the other direction. Okay, the one we just looked at went from high octane to low octane. And when you do that, we had too much advance. Here's an instance where we go from low octane to high octane, which produces too little advance. So what happens when you produce too little advance? Well, the peak pressure is not hit at an early enough point in the cycle, so you end up pushing down on the piston with less force for less time, which produces less power and hotter exhaust. Operative thing is it produces less power. And if you don't change your timing, you're going to think that the high octane fuel produces less power. So I've got one of these guys, his name's off the page here, because he's just a schmo just like the rest of us. And this schmo, just like us, who's made an incorrect assumption. If you put high octane fuel in a low compression engine, you will make less power. High octane, less power. That's false. Okay, it's an issue of timing. Next on the list is going to be air-fuel ratio. So when you're talking air-fuel ratio, you generally speaking, you're talking about altering the jets in your carbs. Of course, a nice little resource for this is Rob and Dave's air-cooled Volkswagen pages. And I didn't specifically pick these guys out. I wanted to find the source of one of the things that our industry kind of likes to do. Okay, well, maybe not industry, but the hobby. The hobby says they like to run rich. Okay, you got to run them rich to keep them cool. Okay, well, what's the source of this? I'm going to dig down into it a little bit, but before I get there, let me tell you, there are a couple of things that I tell you on my videos about how things work. First of all, if you can't do the math, you can't possibly understand how it works. And two, don't ever listen to the white-haired old fart with his shop down at the end of the road. Rob and Dave had made the faux pas of listening to a white-haired dude when we had a shop down at the end of the road. So let's jot down here a little teeny bit and see if we can't figure out who this white-haired old dude was. So we come into this note right here. The optimal stoichiometric balance ratio is 14.5 to 1. That is 14.5 parts air to 1 part fuel. We'll get into that in just a little bit. The VW engine actually runs better fractionally rich settings, 13.8 rather than 14.5, according to Bob Hoover. And I've told you in my videos, do not listen to Bob Hoover. Okay, first of all, it's not 14.5, and ideally 13.8. No, and we're going to go to the Samba, and we're going to listen to some guys that have fuel injection, who can change their fuel-air ratios on the fly, and we will listen to what those guys are telling us specifically. Now, it may be anecdotes, but it's still very strong anecdotal evidence that Bob Hoover and everybody else who's spewing they like to run rich is, in fact, 100% wrong. So let's continue. So this particular thing is the xengineer.org, and they've got an air-fuel ratio right up here, which is really, really nice. But I really like pictures. You know, it's nice to look at a picture. Maximum power happens over here at an air-fuel ratio of 12.6. Roughly, not sure what it is for Bud, but it's going to be in that vicinity. And air-fuel ratio for fuel economy, it's going to be down here in the 15.4 to 1 range. And we're going to go and take a look at what the, like I said, those fuel injection guys are going to tell us. Well, the word is stoichiometric. Stoichiometric is just a fancy word that says balance. It's particularly referencing that chemical equation. You've got a certain number of carbons, a certain number of hydrogens, a certain amount of oxygen, and it all comes together in a chemical equation in a nice balance. We call it stoke. And the ratio is 14.7. It's not 14.5. This is a reputable source, xengineer.org, air fuel ratio. You're going to see this 14.7 other places as well. So that white-haired old fart didn't know what he was talking about. He was in the ballpark. In addition to that, we've also got an air fuel ratio that tells us efficiency of 15.4. Usually it's going to be a little bit more down this side. You've got to go a little bit further this direction to hit peak efficiency. We don't have the best combustion chambers in the world, so you go down this direction a little bit further for our motors. So why would this produce a better, cooler running motor? Well, if you go down here to maximum power, you have essentially run into knock situation. So to overcome the knock, you put additional fuel into the system. The fuel does not actually burn. It's there to absorb heat peak heat during the portion of the forced stroke cycle where you hit maximum pressures during and just before burning. In order to get this peak power, you can overpack the system. It's inefficient, but because you can overpack the system, you can pull more power out. But notice that you drop down, your fuel consumption goes up. The total amount of power that you're putting into the system goes up. Less of the power is used for motion down the road, which leaves more power to push up the temperature of your head, more power to push up the temperature of your exhaust port, because your exhaust temperatures are going to go up when you run in this particular area. You want your car to run cool most of the time, you stay on the lean side. So this notion that we run rich, that these motors like to run rich to run cool, is in fact false. So we come over to the Salmon, and we've got just a general air-fuel ratio write-up that's in performance engines and transmissions. Like I said, a lot of fuel injection guys here. And they all come in here and they start chiming in. 15 to 16 at cruise, 12 and a half, 13 or so under heavy acceleration. This is what their fuel injection systems have been doing to optimize their motors. Stock 1600, 17 to 1 light load, so maybe the factory jetted them, that's very lean. But that's factory jetting. We're not interested in that. Here's a guy who lives at elevation, makes the most power at a little bit below 13 to 1, but his car likes to run around at about 16 or 17 to 1, which is pretty darn lean. If you look at the efficiency AFR curve, you'll see that 16 to 1 is at the efficiency peak. This is actually false, but it is lean of peak. Well, you can read it as well as I can. The link's there, the topic and whatnot, but all these guys are telling you the same thing. You need to be lean of stoke. That's 15, 16, 17 to 1. Let's finish this off with the words of wisdom here from Miniman82. By the way, using richness to cool is about as good an idea as Gene's semi-hemi heads are. The only thing that results from an over-rich mixture are coked-up heads, pistons, that keep your engine running long after you kill the ignition. I run my engine as lean as possible at all times while still avoiding detonation and surging. Thank you, Miniman82. So let's take a look at something else here real quick. So in order to prove to you that what these fuel injection guys are telling you is in fact what's actually happening, a little bit of physics might be in order. So this is what's called the ideal gas law. Some of you may have heard this. Hopefully you've all heard this because I heard it in my high school physics. And why would you, as somebody who likes to work on a vehicle, not be interested in high school physics? So anyway, it's called PV equal nRT. And P, pressure, V is volume, T happens to be the temperature. Yeah, there you go, give me something there. N is the amount of stuff, R is a constant. It's just a way of like manipulating all the things so that well, what's on the left and what's on the right from a unit standpoint, such as areas, temperature, coefficients and stuff like that. Everything balances. And then we've got the T. So anyway, what happens is if you want to richen the system up, and our temperature, because we've enriched it, we know that the temperature goes down. I'm not saying that the temperature doesn't go down, but what happens if your temperature goes down? In order to maintain the same power, you have to have the same pressure. The system with the volume, well, you didn't change the volume. Whatever the motor is, the motor still is. So the pressure has to be the same. The volume has to be the same. So what's on the left doesn't change. If the temperature doesn't go up, and this is a constant, and this little number n right there, the amount of stuff that goes into the system has to go up. In other words, more molecules. So if you take the gas and you burn it inefficiently, let's go back to the graph. If you take the gasoline and you burn it inefficiently, notice that this is an efficiency curve. We're efficient here, we're inefficient over here. So you're burning it inefficiently. But the liquid gas is allowing you to put additional air and additional fuel into the system. So even if it's inefficient, you can overpack the system with fuel and air in order to make up for the lack of efficiency. This allows you to make more power. But whether it makes more power or not, and even if the temperatures are lower, you've still packed in so much fuel and air and burned it so inefficiently that the total amount of heat contained in the system at this point exceeds what would happen if you made the same power down here. Now that doesn't mean that you run your car all the time at this lean air-fuel mixture. And there are systems inside the carburetor that are designed to handle this. So let's take a look. Okay, this right now is looking down the barrel of a Delorto, a Baby Del. This is exactly what I've got in my car. Hopefully mine are cleaner than that. But do you see this little device that sticks up right there? This is what's called a power jet. Comes down and off of here. So at high RPMs, high throttle settings, high RPMs, the power jet will dump additional fuel into the system. And all carburetors have a power jet system so that when you get to high RPMs, high throttle settings, your system is capable of, at that point, dumping in additional fuel and air and enriching the system so that you can make peak power. But it shuts down once you back off. You never want to run rich the bulk of your time or your motor will run hot. Remember, that's what this video is about. What do you do to keep it cool, and what are some of the things that are going to make it run hot? Well, that's it. Richen it up and you run hot. Keep it nice and lean and you'll run cool. Well, that's about the end of that one right there. So we're back down here at the business end. Let me see if I can summarize what I had in the video. Number one, octane. The primary constituent of gasoline is octane, not isooctane. There are a whole bunch of isomers. Only one of them is known as isooctane. It contains 8 carbons, 18 hydrogens. When you crack it open, it burns. Those independent molecular interactions between the carbons and the hydrogens and the oxygens all produce the same energy. Therefore, no matter what the octane is, you get the same energy. So octane does not produce more or less energy. Number two, because the octanes burn at slightly different rates, you have to modify your timing. It is the timing adjustments that dictate whether or not the low octane or the high octane is producing more or less power. So you have to customize your timing for whatever it is you're trying to run. Okay, let's talk about the air-fuel ratio real quick. Okay, the old adage, the company line is that you need to run them rich. They like to run rich. In fact, they do not like to run rich, as evidenced by what the fuel injection guys are telling us. They like to run lean. You run them rich only when you're trying to produce peak power. And I try and live what I tell you. So I try and run lean. I run with ethanol. I run the worst gasoline I can put in here. Yeah, run the worst gasoline you can put in there. And there's a guy out there on the West Coast who's got like 10 times as many subscribers as I do, probably 20 times. And I just watched him do a video where he said, no, you have to run high octane. No, you don't run high octane. Anyway, down here in my tailpipe, you know, if I'm running rich, I'd probably put my finger in there and I'd pull out a bunch of carbon. So that's not too bad. It's dark, but I mean, considering how many miles I run, you're going to get something, but that's really not much. Anyway, I think that's enough for this one. Thanks for watching. I'll do number 2 or so of this one. Oh, I don't know. Maybe in a week or so.